It is 8 o'clock and this is the UK Tonight. Coming up, an historic judgment by the Supreme Court. After a lengthy legal battle, the UK's most senior judges rule the term woman in the Equalities Act is based on biological sex, to the joy of campaigners. Trans activists, though, say they are deeply concerned and that the ruling sets back their rights 2 decades. We're going to hear from both sides tonight. Also ahead. Talks resume to resolve Birmingham's bin strike, but there's still no breakthrough as their council leader tells us there's a fair and reasonable offer on the table for refuse workers. Plus, good news for the Chancellor as inflation falls by more than expected. We'll have the details on why it won't last long. And scientists say they have discovered the secret to getting strike after strike in 10-pin bowling. We'll speak to the researcher behind the study along with a professional bowler to find out more. All that to come and much more on the UK Tonight. Good evening and thank you for being with us. We'll begin with a landmark judgment by the Supreme Court, which today ruled the legal definition of a woman is based on biological sex. Well, it marks the end of a lengthy legal battle between the Scottish Government and the campaign group for Women's Scotland. Now, Scottish ministers had argued transgender people with gender recognition certificates were entitled to sex-based protections, while campaigners said they only applied to people born female. As the UK's most senior judges ruled, the concept of sex is binary. Women's rights groups have celebrated, but a number of trans organisations say they are deeply concerned by the decision. Our Scotland correspondent Conor Gillies has our top story.
We unanimously allow
what is a woman?
The minority, the trans...
Eyes on the answer to that, the central, sensitive question judges at the highest civil court in the land were tasked with answering.
The unanimous decision of this court is that the terms woman and sex in the Equality Act 2010 refer to a biological woman.
It was a case brought by these campaigners who sought clarity on the law.
How are you feeling?
Absolutely jubilant.
And today at this court came the crescendo.
There's annoyance that we've had to spend so long fighting something that was so clear, and when you heard it spelt out, it is really clear, and that is what the law should be. So it's a vindication.
It has been a noisy, polarising debate stretching back years. The Scottish Parliament's plans to make it easier to change gender were blocked, and controversy swirled around a double rapist housed in a women's jail. But this case was about examining the law and who can enter single-sex spaces.
It does, I think, damage the case of those who say, well, I identify as female and therefore you should let me into a sport, a safe space or something like that.
There will still be protections for trans people from discrimination, but campaigners say this is an attack on their entire identity.
It feels like we've had our rights taken away. I don't know what value my gender recognition certificate has. What rights does it give me? Is it worth the paper it's printed on? It's not a very glamorous piece of paper, you know, it's literally a piece of paper. Is it, if I ripped it up, would it make a difference to my life now? I just don't know. And it's that that's being ignored as well. It's the, you know, the judges, we're talking about clarity. If anything, we've got less clarity for the trans community.
Among the reaction, campaigner and author J.K. Rowling. It took 3 extraordinary, tenacious Scottish women, she said, with an army behind them to get this case heard. And in winning, they've protected the rights of women and girls across the UK. The legal question may now be settled, but there are immediate real-world consequences across Scotland, England and Wales. Businesses, organisations, governments and associations will have to digest this judgment and ensure they're operating within the rules. They may think this is a victory, but judges stress there are no winners and no losers. This decision is far from the end of the story.
Well, Conor joins us now live from Edinburgh. Good evening to you, Conor. So there's been lots of political reaction then, I assume?
Yeah, good evening, Kamali. Clearly ramifications across the whole of Great Britain to this judgment, and essentially tonight it moves from the legal world into the political sphere once again. Essentially this row, this court standoff began around a challenge to the Scottish Government's position back in 2018 that it allowed trans women to be included essentially as quotas when counting gender balance on public boards. Now, the Scottish Government has accepted the ruling today and has said that it intends to protect the rights for everyone. What that means, well, hopefully we'll find out in the coming days and weeks. That stands, though, in stark contrast to the position from the Prime Minister from Downing Street tonight. Let's have a look at the statement from them. They say, we have always supported the protection of single-sex spaces based on biological sex. They say this ruling brings clarity and confidence for women and service providers such as hospitals, refuges and sports clubs. And they conclude single-sex spaces are protected in law and will always be protected by this government. Political reaction too from the opposition, from the Conservatives, and Kamali Melbourne. Let's hear what she has to say.
Sex has always meant biological sex, and what we have seen is a lot of people misinterpreting the law. They've had guidelines from all sorts of organisations that actually do not follow the law. So I really welcome this judgment. We need more. We need better clarification in legislation. The Equality Act could be improved. When I was Minister for Equalities, I was working on legislation to actually clarify that sex in the Act meant biological sex. And I think this is really a victory for all of those women who've had to go to court to fight for rights that they already had.
Now, clearly all of these rules and regulations will need to be reviewed and examined. And I talked about real-world examples. Well, NHS England has confirmed that it is reviewing its policy, which at the moment, as of today, stated that trans people should be accommodated according to the way that they dress and their pronouns. One organisation in one part of the UK now reviewing and reflecting on this position on a landmark day.
Just shows how consequential it is. Connor, for now, thank you for that. Well, let's speak to Ellie Gomersall, a trans rights activist and campaign manager for Glasgow Greens. Ellie, thank you very much for joining us today. It's good to speak with you again. How are people feeling? How are you feeling following this ruling?
It's pretty devastating, actually. And look, I think that this undoes a 20-year understanding that a trans person who has obtained a gender recognition certificate is, for the vast majority of intents and purposes, legally recognised as their so-called acquired gender. This undoes that. Gender Recognition Act from 2004 was put in place following a legal challenge to the European Court of Human Rights, who determined that not being able to change our legal gender was in breach of our human rights. And now, I think with the uncertainty raised by this ruling, I really worry that we're back in that same position again.
Do you feel that it's uncertain? I mean, the judge in his conclusions seemed pretty clear. He said the conclusion does not remove or diminish the important protections available to trans people under the Equalities Act for 2010, trans people who have a GRC.
Well, this is the thing, is that this does only affect trans people who have got a gender recognition certificate. For actually the vast majority of us who don't have a gender recognition certificate, because it's so impossible to actually get one, nothing will change in law. Even so, I do think that the principle that it's now impossible to ever be permanently actually recognised for who we are is an incredibly worrying one, and as I say, could go against that original European Court of Human Rights ruling. The other issue that I think is really important in this is the way that organisations now respond to this. As I say, in terms of the actual ruling itself, for the vast majority of trans people, nothing should actually change. But as we just heard, organisations, including things like the NHS, for example, are now starting to review their policies. That actually doesn't come into the scope of whether or not someone's got a gender recognition certificate or not. But now these things are starting to be reviewed. And I think that it's incredibly worrying that we could end up in this situation where organisations or individuals feel that they have to discriminate against trans people, even when that's not actually what the law says. So I don't think that this brings clarity. If anything, I think it brings more confusion. And I hope that over the next days and weeks, we'll hear more from legal experts in terms of what this ruling actually means for trans people and also for organisations. But in a situation where hate crimes against trans people have been increasing rapidly over the past few years, I'm really worried for my community. It's less safe for me to go out and just live my life as a normal person, as I wish I could just do. Trans people are just like anyone else. We wake up in the morning, brush our teeth, go to work, and things like this are putting up more and more and more barriers. And I don't think anyone at all is benefiting from that.
On that point about the hate crimes towards transgender people, they have increased from March of 2023, up 11% on the year previous to that, even as other recorded hate crimes have fallen. So as the Prime Minister has said, it is a minority of people that is persecuted. But these judges, these eminent judges, 5 of them unanimously came to this decision. I mean, you do accept the decision, I'm sure already, but you want to see how it works in practice.
Well, the thing is, this is a legal ruling, and actually I think this is the sort of decision that shouldn't be being made in a court. It should be being made in Parliament. In fact, the Scottish Parliament made a decision like this just a couple of years ago, overwhelmingly with support from MSPs from every single party in Scotland. The UK government then blocked that bill. So I think that these are actually discussions that trans people ourselves should be being part of. Trans people weren't part of this decision. I think that for far too long now, the Labour government has just sat on its hands when it comes to trans people. It issues out warm words every so often, but then in the next breath rolls back things like trans healthcare. So I think that we've got an increasingly hostile situation towards trans people in the UK. Myself and my friends who are trans, and actually everyone I know who's trans, is increasingly scared and worried about what this means for our ability to interact with just public daily life. And I think that it's time for the UK government to actually start defending us as the vulnerable minority that we are, instead of sitting on its hands and capitulating to those who wished we didn't exist.
Now, Ellie, you'll know that John Swinney, leader of the SNP and the First Minister, has accepted this ruling. Where does it go next for you, then?
Well, I think the really tricky thing as well is that, let's remember, as Connor said in the previous package, this decision was originally based on the idea of quotas on public boards, something as mundane as that. And that actually ultimately is what this ruling has determined, the interpretation of whether or not that law could go ahead, including trans people. But as I think we've seen from the news today, there's going to be huge ramifications for this. And ultimately, I think where I really hope that we go from here is that people start listening to trans people, start just treating us as normal people wanting to go about our daily lives, because for too long we've been used as a political pawn, a pawn in this sort of debate around our rights. But for those of us who are actually trans, this isn't just a debate. This doesn't switch off once we get to the next news segment. This is how we go about society. This is how we live. And you don't choose to be trans. You are trans. And I just want to be able to get on with my life. So I hope that those in positions of power in both the Scottish Parliament and in the UK Parliament, like I say, stop sitting on their hands and actually work to improve trans rights, whether that's in things like healthcare or our legal recognition, because the UK is falling behind so many of our neighbours around the world. And the UK is becoming an increasingly unpleasant place to be trans.
Okay. Ellie, it's good to speak with you again. I wish you all the best, and we'll speak again. Ellie Gomez-Walder, thank you very much for your time today. Thank you. All right, well, let's speak now to Maya Forstater, the co-founder of the charity Sex Matters and the campaigner with For Women Scotland, the group who brought that case today. Maya Forstater, thanks so much for being with us this evening. So, look, it's taken a long time for you to reach this point. How are you?
We're delighted. This judgment was really clear. It put women's rights at the centre, and it took the Equality Act back to what it should have been, and it's been clouded by layers and layers of misunderstanding. What the judges said was that the Equality Act protects everyone. It protects people against sex discrimination, age discrimination, race, disability, and gender reassignment. So it protects trans people against discrimination, for example, losing their job or being paid less or being refused to rent a flat, for example. But it also protects women against sex discrimination, and that includes enabling organisations to have single-sex spaces and services, and to do things like if somebody wants a female doctor, that they can have a female doctor. And what the Supreme Court said was that these two protected characteristics are different and they shouldn't be conflated. Everyone's rights are protected, but women's rights are women's rights.
You will have heard what Ellie had to say to me before you and I spoke. A real sense of fear from Ellie, and she says from her friends within the community. I mean, what do you say to trans people who are feeling that kind of concern this evening after this ruling?
I think, I mean, there is a real conflict between men who want to use women's spaces and women who want privacy and dignity. And in this case, the Supreme Court ruled in favour of women's privacy and dignity and in favour of having clear rules. That doesn't mean that trans people are excluded from public life. It just means that everyone is excluded from single-sex services and spaces that don't belong to them. And that's going to be disappointing for people who identify as trans, because for the last 15 years, they've been told by organisations who've misunderstood the law that they have the right to access spaces where other people depend on them for privacy, for safety, and for fairness in terms of sport. And so they are going to be disappointed, but that's just the way it is.
Maya, look, you will have heard Ellie as well say that this ruling has made it more complicated. Do you see it as that way, that it's now become more complicated? We've already got the NHS, because of what you said, for 15 years of having one way of looking at this, now re-looking at it again, which will potentially lead to further complication?
No, I think it's made it simpler. I mean, the NHS currently has rules that say they operate single-sex accommodation. So it's not single-sex wards, but like bays in hospitals. And so they guarantee people that they will have single-sex room where they're sleeping. But then they say that people who identify as trans should be accommodated according to their pronouns and the clothes they wear. And everyone knows that a man who wears women's clothing and changes his pronouns is not a woman. It's not fair on the women in those hospital wards to find themselves sharing a bedroom with a man. And often when we talk to NHS nurses and doctors, what they will actually do is put a trans person in a side room. But that's not what the policy tells them to do. The policy tells them to place someone according to their pronouns and their clothing. And most NHS workers know that that's not safe and it's not fair. So what this judgment does, it does something very simple. It says that men are men and women are women. And in most parts of life, it doesn't matter what sex you are, but in places where it does, you need to be clear.
Yeah, absolutely. But Maya, let me just push on that a little bit, because then you could have some trans women who then feel excluded from the space that they think they should be in that particular instance.
But they're men. I mean, they might feel excluded, but the fact is that's a space for women. And somebody who's a man who wishes he was a woman is not a woman. And I'm sorry if he feels excluded, but we need to have clear rules in order to protect the people who those services are intended for. And that doesn't mean treating people badly or not treating them at all. Men who identify as transgender, who call themselves trans women, may be a vulnerable subset of men, but they don't share an experience with women because they're not women.
You will have seen some of the political reaction, Maya, right? Kemi Badenoch saying there's still more work to be done. I mean, do you agree with that there's still more that needs to be done here?
Yes, I mean, it's a really good judgment, but most people don't read Supreme Court judgments. What they need is very clear guidance from the government and clear guidance from the regulator, the Equality and Human Rights Commission, and the Health and Safety Inspectorate to just make it really clear to employers, to service providers, to local councils, to schools, to universities, what they're expected to do without having to read the Supreme Court judgment. And that's down to the government. It's also down to the government what data they collect on people. You know, when they ask people what sex you are, the answer should be male or female, not 56 different categories.
I mean, do you expect this government now to adhere to this? We already know that there seems to be some disagreement, perhaps, within the Labour Party. We know where Kemi Badenoch stands, but the Labour Party?
There's been good statements from Keir Starmer and from Bridget Phillipson saying that they support this judgment. They are the government. It was the Labour Party's Equality Act that this Supreme Court judgment is upholding. And so now it's up to them to implement it and put it into practice.
All right, Maya Forstater, really good to speak with you, and I wish you all the best. Thank you, Maya. All right, now, there was some good news for the Chancellor of the Exchequer today, as inflation fell by more than expected, and for the second month in a row. Prices rose by 2.6% in March. That's the slowest pace since December. But while the Treasury will welcome the figures, analysts predict a spike this month as a number of household bills have gone up. Our business correspondent, Paul Kelso, has the detail.
Good news on inflation, at least for now. Let's have a little look at the numbers. This is consumer price inflation. We see that huge spike above 11% caused by the war in Ukraine. It's fallen down. What have we learnt? We've learnt that in March it fell to 2.6%. That's down on February and January, still above the Bank of England's target. That's the red line, but encouraging for consumers and even perhaps the Chancellor nonetheless. Let's look at the underlying figures which help tell the story. This is the CPI line I just showed you. The light blue is February. The dark blue, the new figure in March. We can see the fall there. Goods inflation also fell. That's less important than services inflation. 80% of the economy is services. Fell 0.3 percentage point services inflation. That core inflation too. That strips out volatile elements like fuel and food, and that also fell. That's a key number for the Bank of England. Raises the question, why has inflation been falling? Prices falling? The short answer is fuel prices. Down for petrol and diesel at the pumps. This is crude oil prices, Brent crude. Look at this huge decline in the price of oil in March and April. What caused that? Well, Donald Trump caused that. His threat, now delivered, of tariffs and a trade war has made markets essentially reflect the global economy is going to slow down. Less demand means less need for oil, so the oil price has plunged. Good news in the short term at the pumps, less good news in the long term. So the question is, will this last? I'm afraid the answer to that is no, and this is why. Consumer bills went up in April and they're going to stay high. You can look at some of the categories here. Mobile, TV and broadband, council tax, water bills, all up. Energy prices going up as well. A total, we think, of around £450 for the average household. That's going to push inflation up above 3%. Forecasters thinking it'll stay there for the rest of the year. So what does that mean for the Bank of England? If inflation is staying high, rates are going to have to stay high, aren't they? Well, that's not what the markets think. This chart shows us what the Bank of England has done. The blue line, so cuts, and we've seen a cut this year, a couple already. The red line is what markets think will happen next. They think there'll now be 4 rate cuts this year, 4 more, not 3. Why? Because they think the banks have to cut to effectively take account of a slowing economy. There's still huge uncertainty about what tariffs mean for the UK, but ultimately this says markets think the thing that will beat inflation is not the Bank of England, but a slowing economy here and around the world.
That's Paul Kelso reporting there. Still to come on the UK Tonight. We'll hear from the leader of Birmingham City Council after fresh talks to end the binge strike end without breakthrough. Also ahead, the family of a man who killed someone after escaping from a mental health unit says he was failed by the NHS. And the highest daily number of channel crossings yet this year will have the latest as the government discusses a removals agreement with France.
This is how you travel when the mafia wants to kill you.
He's almost given up his own freedom, but that's the price he's willing to pay.
Here, they don't just arrest 'Ndrangheta mafia members, they also live among them.
Time after time, I've seen the devastating impact of extreme weather and climate change.
We don't have much snow at the moment.
They've had a warm spring and exceptionally hot summer, and that means they're expecting to lose more than 3 times the amount of ice than they usually do.
Flames are still forcing people from their homes and leaving many questioning their futures.
Here was my life. We have nothing. I can't say anything, it's so sad.
This disaster is testing the resolve of everyone on this island.
The only way out now is by boat.
Everything you see is devastated, and the misery being felt by people living here is repeated in towns and villages across Central Europe.
Sky News, get the full story first.
Turkey is burying its dead. The loss is profound.
Whole families died in this collapse, generations wiped out. The violence has penetrated the heart of the city rather than being contained to the estates around the edge, and that speaks to the level of anger being felt here.
In Sweden, police have seized a lethal stash. This is just a small sample of the deadly arsenal taken off the streets.
This is an example of an advert, really. Anyone of any age could say, I'll do that for £1 million, and then have to go and shoot someone.
Yes.
I'm Siobhan Robbins, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Berlin.
Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers.
We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
Welcome back. Now, the family of a man who escaped a mental health unit and went on to commit murder have told Sky News they feel let down by those meant to be keeping him and others safe. Joshua Carroll had previously escaped a number of times before the incident back in 2022. Our correspondent, Katie Barnfield, has the story.
My heart broke. It's a horrible situation.
Julie and Leanne Carroll are coming to terms with the fact that their son and brother is now a convicted murderer. Joshua Carroll is waiting to be sentenced for killing Hedley Thomas, also known as Barry, by beating him to death in a park in Trafford in September 2022. At the time, Joshua was meant to be inside a secure mental health unit, but he'd escaped, and not for the first time.
I didn't know anything until he'd been arrested.
He come to my house. To us, it was just a normal, Joshua's escaped from hospital again. And yeah, everything just fell apart from there, I think.
You think when somebody goes to hospital, or when your son's, obviously poorly, that they go to hospital and they get the right help and they're safe and they're secure. But that wasn't the scenario for Josh.
At the time of the murder, Joshua was an inpatient at Park House, a mental health unit run here by Greater Manchester Mental Health Trust until it closed last November. The day before the attack, Joshua had absconded once again. His family say he escaped from Park House 21 times in total, and they complained to the trust over and over again, asking for help. Joshua's family showed me more than 20 pages of complaints and responses from the trust dating back to 8 years before the attack. After Joshua's fourth escape from Park House, they asked for him to be moved to another unit, but this wasn't done. They complained again about his repeated escapes just 5 weeks before the murder. Since 2022, the trust has had several Section 29A warning notices from the Care Quality Commission. These are issued when the CQC decides significant improvements need to be made and there is a risk of harm. In the case of Greater Manchester Mental Health Trust, their concerns included ward security systems not consistently keeping people safe. Dr John Mulligan is a clinical psychologist at the Trust and a Unite Union representative. He and his colleagues have been striking for the past 7 months, saying they just don't have enough staff to keep people safe.
Violent incidents amongst
our service users are quite rare. It's more likely that our service users are the victims of violence and aggression and difficulties like that. But serious incidents are happening regularly, far too regularly. It's very uncomfortable and it's very upsetting for staff and for patients and families.
Greater Manchester Mental Health Trust told us they are deeply sorry for what happened while Joshua Carroll was under their care, and added, under the Trust's new leadership, we've been working closely with NHS England, our commissioners and the CQC to create better, safer and well-led services for all. As part of this work, we are currently carrying out an in-depth investigation into the care and treatment provided to Mr Carroll and the circumstances leading to Mr Thomas's death, the findings of which will be shared with NHS England.
They are partly to blame. If you had done your job properly, we wouldn't be in this mess and 2 families wouldn't have been destroyed and so many hearts wouldn't have been broken.
Barry Thomas's family told us we should remember that a life was taken, that they believe Joshua Carroll tried to play down his actions, and they thank the police for bringing justice to their family. Katie Barnfield, Sky News in Manchester.
Well, more than 700 people crossed the Channel to the UK yesterday. That is a record for the year so far. And it comes as the government confirms talks are underway with French officials on a potential agreement over the return of people who arrive on small boats. Well, our correspondent Emma Birchley joins us now for more on this. Evening to you, Emma. So not great news for the government, this.
It really isn't, is it? 705 people yesterday in 12 boats, bringing the total for this week alone to 1,660. The total for 2025 already to close to 9,000. And actually, that is the highest total in the first 4 months of a year since records began back in 2018. And as you would expect, the opposition have jumped on this with huge criticism. We've heard from the Shadow Home Secretary, Chris Philp, who said it's another day of Labour failure. He says that cancelling the Rwanda scheme was a catastrophic mistake. That was the scheme, of course, to send asylum seekers to the African country to have their claims assessed and processed there. The government, though, saying that they are really making substantial moves to deal with this problem. There has been a statement from a spokesperson from the Home Office who said, we all want to end dangerous small boat crossings which threaten lives and undermine our border security. We're introducing tougher enforcement powers with new legislation and intensifying our collaboration with France and other countries who face the same challenges by exploring fresh and innovative measures to dismantle the business models of the criminal smuggling gangs. So there are various things. For example, they're training more drone pilots to be able to actually intercept the boats before they reach the channel in the first place. There's also a new unit, an intelligence unit, which will be stationed in Dunkirk, which will not only be able to investigate these gangs, but if they arrest people, to actually prosecute. It will speed that whole process up. And while all of this is going on, today we've had confirmation that British officials have been talking to the French government about a new deal, a one-for-one deal. So if someone's here, they don't have any paperwork, they don't have their documents, they can be sent back to France, and potentially then someone can be sent from France who has got a legitimate reason to be here. So there's plenty going on, but all the time the numbers of people crossing is growing, and of course we're only just getting into the better weather, aren't we?
Summer now, aren't we? All right, yeah. And I really appreciate that. Thank you for now. All right, well, still to come on the UK tonight, we're going to hear from the leader of Birmingham City Council after fresh talks to end the bin strike end without breakthrough. Welcome back. And to the ongoing bust-up over bins in Birmingham now. And the leader of the City Council has told Sky News that they're determined to bring the strike to an end. John Cotton says there is a fair and reasonable deal on the table for refuse workers, but despite a fresh round of talks, there is still no breakthrough. Well, this comes as the Unite union accused the council of lying over the terms of the offer, as our Midlands correspondent Lisa Dowd reports.
The leaders of the UK's second city know that this is a very bad look. It will take some time to get rid of the rats who found a home here, but the council claim they have taken most of the rubbish away. Tell that to the queues of residents, where getting access to the tip has become a competitive sport.
It was difficult to get the slot. I had to do it in the middle of the night, and literally at 4 o'clock in the morning.
Do you have sympathy with the bin workers?
No, not really. Don't have any sympathy for them at all.
I have had enough, really, yeah. I was sympathetic a bit at first, but a bit less so now.
Solidarity with the workers and that, because I wouldn't probably accept an £8 pay cut. I mean, obviously it's taken its toll a bit on the whole city now, isn't it?
The strike has entered its 5th week. The council says it needs to end.
So there's a very fair and reasonable offer on the table from the council that means that none of the workers who are affected by the changes that we're making to the service need to lose out.
What would you say to the people of Birmingham who themselves have told me again today they see no end in sight to this dispute when they are paying some very high council tax rises?
And I absolutely get the frustration and annoyance that there is amongst the people of Birmingham. I'm probably myself, I live here, so, I experience this on a day-to-day basis. We are absolutely determined to bring this dispute to a conclusion.
Union leaders say talks are going nowhere.
Now, I can't make the connection between a council leader saying that nobody needs to lose any pay and then its negotiators turning up today with absolutely no proposals and only wanting to hear from us, and once they heard from us, not willing to respond and saying they don't want to meet with us again until Wednesday of next week. Well, here's our response to that. We will meet you anytime, any place, anywhere.
The council says that at its worst there were 22,000 tonnes of rubbish on the city's streets. They say they've collected most of that now, with the rest of the backlog expected to be cleared soon.
It's agency workers doing most of that, and some can't see the council bin workers returning anytime soon.
Does it feel like there's an end in sight for this bin strike? Do you feel, or do you think
No, I can't see one coming. Can't see it. It will last longer. They are digging the heels in.
Do you blame them?
No.
The union is warning that they have a mandate for strike action until September, but the council hopes to get back to weekly household rubbish collections soon, using a temporary workforce. Lisa Dowd, Sky News, Birmingham.
Now, as you can imagine, some people in Birmingham are getting a bit sick of all the coverage of the bin strike, thinking that it's probably giving the city a bit of a bad name. Well, let's speak to Pat Price, Director of Brum Car Chargers, who joins us now. Pat Price, I love the name of the company, by the way. How are things, and what's the state of the refuse collection where you are?
Well, like covered in your article there, it's improved a little bit over the last few days with the agency workers, but it's been a total nightmare. There's been, huge piles of bags of rubbish on street corners that people can't get past. Disabled people can't get past on the pavements because of all the rubbish. Massive increase in rodent infestations, particularly rats. The only people that are making a success of this are pest controllers.
Yeah, we've seen some of that, haven't we? People going around with little air rifles or big air rifles to shoot some of the rats. Now, as you say, there has been lots of talk that it's getting cleaned up because of those agency workers. But what's your experience of it been, Pat, for the past couple of weeks?
Well, I think for businesses generally, it's been pretty terrible, especially those in the hospitality world, because they've obviously got commercial-sized bins, and you find that their neighbours are chucking their rubbish in there to try and get rid of it, and with the knock-on effects for businesses. So it's been a bit of a nightmare, really, and the bin workers are holding the council and the people of Birmingham to ransom again.
You don't sound very sympathetic to their demands.
Well, not really. I mean, they've got. I think there was a good interview on Radio 4 the other day about how many bin workers they've got on a wagon compared to the rest of the country. And they've got one extra bin worker on a wagon compared to everywhere else, and they're refusing to modernise. So what's the council supposed to do? They've got to draw the line somewhere. Meanwhile, we're all paying increased council tax and business rates and everything else, and it's us that suffer.
And we know the straits that Birmingham Council is in itself. I think that the extra bin worker is probably a legacy from the previous strikes. This has happened before in the city, hasn't it?
Yeah, well, we've had previous problems with the bins and bin strikes, and it's like the cliche, it's deja vu all over again.
Now, Pat, you will have known and seen, of course, there's some worry of sort of the reputation of Birmingham being damaged by all of this. I mean, do you give that any credence at all? I mean, I was saying to my...
Absolutely, 100%. I had a call with somebody from an industry association earlier on this morning, and the first thing they did was pull my leg about the state of Birmingham and the rubbish and have we had our bins collected. And the first couple of times it's funny, but after a while it gets a little bit wearing.
And that's no good for business, is it? Having that sort of reputation.
It's bad for the city, all round.
They say they're getting there. I mean, the talks have broken down again. The offer is there, and there's, as we've been reporting, some dispute between what the offer is and what the unions are saying. I mean, you are there, you're seeing sort of the streets being cleaned up. What's your sense of when this comes to an end? We heard from that woman in Lisa's package that doesn't see the end in sight at all.
Well, I don't know about an end in sight to the strikes, but I mean, if these agency workers can get the place cleaned up and they can carry on doing it for a period of time, then I think the council probably has to hold their nerve. The only trouble is, of course, there's a cost to this, a financial cost, and that's going to be passed on to council taxpayers and businesses through their business rates.
Well, I was going to say, so that would be your preference, though, would it be, that the council do hold their nerve, don't give in to the demands to increase the pay and conditions, but you have to put up with this for, the foreseeable...
Well, I think, from what, as I understand it, from what, we see in the press and we hear on the radio, is that the offer sounds pretty reasonable to me. So you can't just capitulate, like that. You just got to, at some stage, you've got to hold the line and say, well, enough is enough.
Talk to us about your specific business, Pat. Have you guys been impacted? Are you roadside chargers? Is that how the business...
Domestic. We install domestic chargers, EV chargers. So the impact to us has been, there's some rubbish outside of people's houses, but the impact to my business isn't as severe as my neighbours around the Moseley area that have got, hospitality and leisure businesses. It's a real nightmare for those people.
And I'm not sure if you go out and do the installations yourself, but when you speak to people around and about, what's the feeling?
Oh yeah, well, people are cheesed off, and people are just fed up of, not just, as you said, not just the mess and the rubbish and the increase in rats, but also, like you mentioned earlier in the piece, about the reputational damage to the city and the morale. And nobody wants to be held to ransom, so it's not a good position at all.
No, not at all. All right, well, look, let's hope they get it sorted as soon as possible and you get back to business as usual. Pat Price, Director of Brummie Car Chargers. Really appreciate your time, Pat.
Nice to talk to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Pat. Bye.
Cheers, mate. Bye-bye.
All right, you're watching the UK Tonight. Still to come. The secret to bowling a strike. We're going to hear from one of the scientists who's cracked the formula to a perfect game. And in the sport, we'll discuss why Man United's goalkeeper was dropped at the weekend, but will be back for their most important game of the season.
I'm Stuart Ramsey, and I'm Sky's chief correspondent.
An enormous explosion that's just come down. I think it was a monster just landed in between us.
Hundreds and hundreds of people hoping to get north, ultimately to get to the United States.
It's a border where they're not welcome, and yet they keep coming.
We saw snatch squads going in, grabbing people, taking them out and putting them into trucks and taking them away.
They make about 50 kilos of fentanyl a week. It's incredibly dangerous and toxic stuff.
There's been an upsurge in deaths. The fighting between the gangs is getting more and more vicious.
Is this now all your territory?
Yeah.
The battlefield is outside the barricades, which is over there. This is much more like a normal town. It's really sending a clear message that Venezuela is eager for change. We've been crushed. Free from wherever you get your news. We are in the middle of a forest, in a jungle really, and they're attempting to keep these men alive. This is real, hardcore emergency medicine. The information on this could bring down the entire network, not just in Iraq and Syria, but across the world. Sky News, the full story first. Well, hundreds of thousands of people have been using the beast for years to traverse Mexico, but it is really dangerous. Many people have died riding it.
The Premier League Running is live on NBC and streaming on Peacock, with a crucial fixture in the race for Europe. Saturday, the unrelenting drama heats up as both Aston Villa and Newcastle chase Champions League qualification. An opportunity neither want to squander. This is the Premier League Running, live on NBC and Peacock.
Welcome back. And still to come, everyone wanted to know the secret of bowling a strike in 10-pin bowling. Well, scientists have worked out the formula to the perfect game, and I'll tell you all about it in a moment. But first, David is here with the sport. We're not going to talk 10-pin bowling. I'm sure you're a perfect strike kind of...
want to know how to
stay around then, David. I'll show you, mate. It's all about the science. We're going to talk Man United, though, I think, aren't we? Big game for them tomorrow, and they have decided to reinstate the number one, Andre Onana, after calamitous game in the first leg.
Yeah, I mean, United have had issues with strikes this season as well, but it's the other end of the pitch that we're talking about tonight. The goalkeeper, Andre Onana, this is ahead of the Europa League quarter-final second leg against Lyon tomorrow night. And look, whether it's fair or unfair, Manchester United goalkeepers are compared to those Premier League era greats that United have had over the last 30 years. The immediate two that spring to mind, Peter Schmeichel, people will remember, Edwin van der Sar, people will remember. Two of the greats of the game over the last 30 years. David De Gea under Sir Alex Ferguson as well, one of the great Manchester United goalkeepers, certainly in the top three of the Premier League era. So whether it's fair or not, the current man between the sticks is always compared to those great names. And the problem for Andre Onana has been that he's made some high-profile errors. And we're not just talking about in the last week, which he has done, and we'll come on to that, but really since he joined in July of 2023. So that the pressure has ramped up and continues to ramp up on the goalkeeper, and it all came to a head a little bit last week in one of United's biggest games of the season against Lyon, Europa League quarter-final second leg, and the goalkeeper was at fault for both of Lyon's goals. Now, United, you might argue on paper, are a better side than Lyon and should be going through in this tie. And the reaction from United's head coach, Ruben Amorim, was to drop the goalkeeper for their weekend game on Sunday against Newcastle United. Didn't go particularly well.
The new one shipped for them, didn't he?
Yes. So the new man came in, that was Altay Bayindir, for his Premier League debut on Sunday, conceded 4. He was at fault for one of the goals.
Definitely.
So the head coach, maybe in the back of his mind, was thinking, maybe if this Altay Bayindir has a good game, maybe he might play on Thursday. But given he had a poor afternoon, Andre Onana is being reinstated for the game tomorrow night, and it just ramps up the scrutiny even further on United's goalkeeper for what is a really crucial game in United's season.
Well, they talk about character in football. We'll see what the character is of the man tomorrow when he plays, because it's a huge game for United. Just how important is it for them and their season that they win tomorrow and then perhaps go on to win the competition?
Yeah, look, absolutely vital. United 14th in the Premier League table at the moment, and really their season hinges on how far they go in the Europa League. If they win it, that gives them a place in the Champions League next season, and that is the premier European football competition. And what that also gives them is not just the kudos of being in that best competition, it brings financial rewards as well. This season, if you're getting to the final of the Champions League, winning a lot of games along the way, you're receiving something like €100 million. And United, who have had financial issues and being really unable to spend money on new players, for how much they would like to spend on new players, that sort of money comes in real handy. So not just is this important on the pitch for United, because look, there's 6 weeks to go, or 6 games to go in the Premier League season, and United are going to post their lowest ever tally of Premier League points this season. So it's absolutely massive, this game tomorrow night. If they can get through that, they're into the last 4. And from United's perspective, they will want to go on and win the whole competition for the sake of the club on and off the pitch.
A lot of pressure.
A lot of pressure tomorrow
lot of pressure
night.
ahead.
And lots of pressure on the pitch as well tonight in the Champions League, because there's action ongoing as well at the moment.
Staying connected is vital for business. Sky Business sponsors this report.
Harry, let's take you back to your last job in Japan. Just talk to us a little bit about that experience, the success you had out there.
I had the time of my life out there. And Japan is such a beautiful country, beautiful people. The most exciting thing is the actual J-League. I think it's probably one of the most competitive leagues that I've worked in, because they've structured it very well regarding with homegrown players to import players. They've got the right kind of mixture. When I went out there, the idea was to progress in the AFC Champions League. They were dominant in the league, but what they wanted to achieve was, you know, success in the AFC Champions League. And that's something that they failed to do. It was fantastic because what a wonderful experience we had out there. We got to the final, which was exceptional effort from the players, from the team, from the club, from the fans. Everyone pulled together. For the experience and for the club itself, they were over the moon of making an AFC Champions League final.
I'm interested in how that helped you to develop as a coach, because that's an experience that a lot of coaches over here don't have.
I'm a firm believer in getting experience. I think everybody wants to coach at the highest level possible, and that's a dream of mine, to compete with the best managers in the world, and hopefully one day I can achieve that. But I also believe that you've got to go out and get experience, and experience from different cultures, different ways football is played. And I suppose my time up in Celtic, I got the chance to work with the Japanese players and the way that they love football.
Sky Business sponsors this report.
Thank you for that, David. Now, Sky News understands that the Trade Secretary, Jonathan Reynolds, will visit China this year to restart trade talks. It comes as Beijing has accused UK politicians of arrogance, ignorance and a twisted mindset in the row over British steel. Our political correspondent, Tamara Cohen, has this.
Keir Starmer and his team wasted no time reaching out to China. He met the President, the Chancellor and other senior ministers have visited. On their minds, economic growth, until the events of last weekend, when British steel was wrested from its Chinese owners, who were accused of running it into the ground. Business Secretary Jonathan Reynolds, who yesterday rode back on his criticism of China, is expected to visit the country later this year. The Treasury say the UK needs China's resources.
We need to make sure we're encouraging investment from China in the UK, but when it comes to critical infrastructure, when there's foreign investment or foreign involvement from any country in critical infrastructure, that needs the highest level of scrutiny, and that's the balance which the government is taking.
Chinese President Xi Jinping, now embroiled in a tariff war with Donald Trump, is looking for new partnerships, here on a trade tour of Asian countries. As a Chinese embassy issued a stinging rebuke to British MPs they accuse of slandering the country and its companies. A spokesman said, "The anti-China rhetoric of some individual British politicians is extremely absurd, reflecting their arrogance, ignorance and twisted mindset."
The government have responded to those comments, saying they'll continue to engage with the second largest economy while being clear-eyed about the risks. But in the background, ministers are discussing whether to designate parts of the Chinese state a national security risk. And some Labour MPs say the rules around Chinese investment in critical sectors simply aren't clear enough.
If we want to stay ahead of our adversaries, we've got to make sure that we're not handing the most advanced technology to our adversaries. We need a clear definition of economic security from the government. We need a clear threat assessment. And we need a clear way in which business and government is going to work together, hand in hand, to keep our country safe in what are now very different and more dangerous times.
Hi.
Hi. China experts say the goalposts also keep moving.
Deals that were made 5 to 10 years ago, I really don't think were made in bad faith. It's just that things have changed, both technologically and geopolitically. 20 years ago, smartphones weren't necessarily part of our critical infrastructure, but as technology keeps progressing, that's going to keep changing.
Steel unlikely to be the last test of Britain's openness to Chinese business. Tamara Cohen, Sky News.
Well, the eagle-eyed of you will have noticed that we haven't actually told you about that new scientific research that can tell you how to bowl strike after strike at 10-pin bowling. Unfortunately, we had to strike that one off due to technical issues with Zoom. But never fear, if you want to know, join us tomorrow where we'll give you all the secrets, we are sure. All right, let's take a look at the weather.
The ideal atmosphere, whatever the altitude. The weather. Sponsored by Qatar Airways.
It will be unsettled through the Easter weekend with showers or more prolonged rain, especially in the west. Southern parts look fine this evening, bar the odd shower, while the north will be largely overcast with outbreaks of rain prolonged over the northern half of Scotland. The rain will turn lighter and more showery overnight, becoming increasingly confined to Scotland. Most other places will turn dry and clear with a local frost developing, but western and southwestern parts can expect some mainly coastal showers. Tomorrow morning will bring sunny spells and showers to most parts, but northern and eastern will look mainly dry, while northern Scotland will be cloudy with more general rain.